you very much. It's a very eclectic and distinguished audience, I know some of you. My job is simply to try and get you enthused about a new Shepparton Art Museum, a new SAM as it's called. That's what I want to do. I'll tell you briefly how I got involved in this, because I really shouldn't be here, and then what I think the opportunity is for Shepparton. I got involved because at a personal level I've been collecting Aboriginal art for 30-odd years, because I'd resolved with my wife and children to give it away, not with my children's happiness entirely, but I'd resolved to give it away in my lifetime, or a large part of it. We have a farm in proximity to Shepparton. The NGV have enough. They're a great institution, but they don't need it. The Lynn Onus was a friend, and he was a Yorta man, and central to our collection is a most wonderful Lynn Onus, which many of you have probably seen when it's been on loan several times at the gallery here, of the Barmer in flood. I've had an involvement with the National Parks Association and the lobbying of the then Brumby government to get Barmer and the Goulburn Broken catchment into a national park, which was achieved. I've been chairman of the Sydney Myer Fund for quite a number of years, and we've had a long involvement with the Shepparton Art Gallery with their Ceramics Prize, firstly a National Ceramics Prize and then an international one in more recent years. What most people don't actually know is that you have in Shepparton effectively the National Ceramics Collection, because 30-odd years ago the then director said, we can't afford to buy a painting, so we'll buy a pot. And then he bought quite a lot of pots, and the subsequent director said, that's a really good idea, let's buy more pots. And now there are 4,000 to 5,000 pieces of ceramics. It's the definitive Australian collection from convict times to the present day, and in the last 20 years it's through the International Ceramics Competition it started buying and collecting wonderful pieces from overseas. So there's something here that most people in the city, let alone anywhere else in Australia, don't know about and ought to know about. So ceramics are obviously central. You've also got here a living treasure in Kirsten Paisley, who's a young, keen, very able young director of SAM, and she and her staff did a really outstanding job showing our Aboriginal collection last year, and that had a very successful season there, and they produced a great catalogue, and they did a good job. So why I came, I talked to the mayor about my enthusiasm for a new SAM, and said I think it's a great opportunity for this town. What might it, and I said I'd help as much as I could personally to get there. Firstly, I think a new SAM in a location that is an iconic location for the city. I always thought of the Shell station as you enter the town on the left there with the lake behind, but there are others. I'm not the determinant of that. But it always did delight me when I learned that the Shell station, the land is actually council land, so the opportunity remains. I've said to the mayor I will personally sponsor an architectural competition to get an architectural vision, because if you're going to sell this idea you actually need pretty pictures of what something might look like. What might that new SAM contain? Obviously it's got to contain and celebrate the ceramics collection and display it properly, not just 25 pots at a time, but really you know, an encyclopedic history of Australian ceramics. It will have eventually a good Indigenous collection, and of course the Indigenous connection for Shepparton is very important. After Melbourne, it's the second biggest Indigenous community in Victoria. It there has to be ways found to make those connections into the Indigenous community, and art is a very good mechanism for that. And I think while we're talking about it, you can't just say, oh yes, well, we'll do that, and then in 10 years' time, when we've got the building, we'll think what we put in it. We actually should be thinking now, what do we need to commission now so that when we do open this, we've got you know, some great new works to put in there that belong here and have never been seen anywhere else. The third major element, I think, for a Shepparton, a new SAM, is the migration experience. Because migration is central to my perception of Shepparton. Every wave of migration that's come to Australia, from the convicts and the first British settlers through to Sudani refugees, have come, and everything in between, and they're all here. And that, while it creates probably some fracture lines and difficulties in the community, is also a fantastic opportunity for this city. So and then of course you need, I think, studios and residency opportunities for visiting artists, because you're not in the major metropolitan area, and you need all the ancillary things that galleries have: administrative space, storage, food and beverage, etc. What might that bring? It'll bring a focus, a new civic pride to the place, a self-confidence, and a sense of identity. It will certainly increase tourism and have a direct and indirect economic benefit. It will promote social cohesion, and I've mentioned that. It will provide employment, both direct employment and indirect employment. And what you see when you look at other models in the world, and Mona is the best one in Australia, is that you get not just the employment from the gallery, and that's significant in itself, but you get creative industries clustering around it, whether they be artist studios, whether they be design studios, whether they be advertising studios. You know, there's a whole, whether they be computer design, web page design, there's a whole lots of things happen around these creative spaces. You'll get an educational resource in Shepparton that will support La Trobe and Melbourne and the other educational activities, and every primary and secondary school in the area too, that should think of a new SAM as a resource for them. And very importantly, I hope that you would get increased respect and reconciliation for the Indigenous population here through the creation and the appreciation of art. So what are the, I've lost a page, but it doesn't matter. It's never worried me before. Why start now? What are the next steps? And probably that's a blessing in terms of my allotted time. What are the next steps? The next step, firstly, the council has set up a new foundation to support the gallery. It's not only to raise funds for the current SAM, and the current SAM is very good, I have to say, but it's not good enough, and it's not the future. But so it has to raise funds. It's being invited to advise on issues around the new SAM, including, very importantly, the governance structure for a new SAM that is best suited to its objectives. It's going to lead the advocacy, I hope, for the new SAM, and it's going to help get the building built and to grow the collection that will go in the building. Secondly, the determination of the best site. I've said the Shell station, but that was always just because I drove past it and thought, wow, that's where you enter town. But if the freeway is changing that and there's a new entrance to the town, let's look at that. If there's a better perspective by the river or by the lake, let's look at that. But one of the foundation's task, as I believe it, is to contribute to that discussion. So I'm very happy to be involved in that. And again, the council has shown leadership in establishing and funding and seeking Victorian government support for a major feasibility study to examine these elements, including the selection of the best site. Next is the architectural competition. I think we should be inviting 5 or 6 just Australian architects. There's wonderful architects in this country. People preferably with museum experience. You think of Alan Powell, who did the beautiful gallery at Tarrawarra in the Yarra Valley. Nonda Katsalides, who did Mona and did the Potter at Melbourne University. It won't be hard to get Sean Godsall. There are wonderful architects around. Ashton Raggett and McDougall, who did the renovations to the Shrine and Hamer Hall, people who've got public art, and they did the Recital Centre and the new Melbourne Theatre Company theatre. So there are good architects around. You invite 5 or 6 of them with track records in the arts, and you pay them a modest sum to come up with a vision for the site once that site has been selected. And then you choose the one you like and that's most suitable and that's within the budget, and that gives you an important selling point. You then put that information that you've got of the site, the architectural vision, the statement of the objectives and the benefits, and a broad brush budget in what's called in the trade the pitch book. And that's the document that you take to funders, government funders and philanthropic funders, corporate funders and private individuals. And you say, look, this is what we want to do, this is the opportunity. And it spells it out in words and pictures for people. And it's really worth getting that little publication absolutely perfect and paying whatever you need to do to get it right, because that's the hard sell. Then you obviously research potential funding sources, and that will require everyone with knowledge of all those sectors: government, philanthropic, corporate, individual. And then you get the commitment from the council to the new governance model, to the final selection of the architect and the translation of their vision into real working drawings. You go to tender, you accept a tender, you get the builder, and off you go. It's really easy. Particularly if, look, I see a page. Just let me see if I've left anything important out. No, that was what was interesting about Shepparton, but everyone else is telling you that today, and I'm sure the Mayor did this morning, so I don't need to. Thank you very much. I think the arts won't solve every issue in Shepparton, but boy, they will touch every issue, and they will solve many of them in part. And just look at the model. Think of Mona. Who'd ever think that every international visitor who comes to Australia wants now to go to Hobart? Why? They'll tell you, Mona. They're reading about it around the world. They're reading about it in the New Yorker, in the European press. You go to Europe, where do you want to go? You want to go to Bilbao to see the Guggenheim, because a bit of arts infrastructure has changed what was there, a derelict 19th century cold, dirty old coal town, into a centre of high fashion, culture, the arts, creative industries. You know, the arts can transform the world. Thank you. It's a genuinely multicultural place. 2, it's got problems that the arts can contribute seriously to a seriously good solution. It's got untapped tourism potential. It's a proximity to the Barmah and the river. It's got a dynamic mayor. That's one of the. It's got the Indigenous community whose creativity and energies ought to be harnessed back into the wider community. It's got problems. It's got unemployment. It's got water issues. It's got all sorts of things that need addressing, and I think what we're talking about here, this idea, goes some way to addressing a lot of them.
Thank you. Really appreciate you.